Welcome to Old Heart Stories. Today, we step back into the long shadow of true fear, to a time when rigid faith demanded silence, and love became the most dangerous kind of confession. Salem, 1692. A period of madness where the smallest whisper could shatter a life, and where judges were tasked with extinguishing the innocent light they were sworn to protect. Can a man bound by the cold steel of the law defy the very God he serves for the profound truth he finds in the eyes of a condemned woman? This is the story of Abigail waiting for the rope, and the conflicted Puritan judge who held her life and his own soul in his hands. Brace yourself. Some choices are made not by faith, but by desperation. The air in the stone room was a raw, unforgiving thing, heavy with the stench of unwashed fear and damp straw. Abigail sat perfectly still on the rough bench, her hands bound by thick hemp that chafed her wrists into bloody ribbons. She had been condemned for 3 days, and the quiet acceptance that had settled over her spirit felt colder than the January wind slicing through the tiny barred window. She had endured the shrieking testimonies of the afflicted girls, the relentless fasting, and the sermons that promised her eternal fire. But what broke her was not the spectacle of justice, but the sheer, agonizing solitude. She was a woman drowning in a sea of hysteria, waiting for the hangman. The heavy oak door scraped open, the sound tearing through the silence like a dropped blade. A single candle flame, cradled in a brass lantern, entered first, casting spectral shadows that danced wildly across the slime-streaked walls. Behind the light stood Thomas. Judge Thomas Hawthorne, the man who had sat above her in his carved chair of judgment, whose unwavering gaze had met hers the moment he pronounced her sentence. Guilty of consorting with Satan, to be hanged by the neck until dead. He was devastatingly precise, built of unforgiving lines and rigid theology. His black waistcoat and starched white collar seemed an impenetrable armor, protecting him from the filth and moral chaos he navigated daily. He had sent 23 souls to the gallows since the madness began, his voice never faltering, his belief in his righteous duty absolute. He did not look at her initially. He placed the lantern on a small, unsteady wooden table and unrolled a sheaf of papers tied with white cord. "Abigail Liddell," Thomas stated, his voice low, a sound accustomed to commanding silence in packed courtrooms. "The execution is set for dawn. I have been sent by the General Court for a final, obligatory inquiry. Should you choose now to repent and name your confederates, your soul may find grace." Abigail watched him, a strange, burning clarity in her chest. She had nothing left to lose, not even dignity. "There are no confederates, sir," she replied, her voice husky from disuse, yet steady. "Only the truth you refuse to see." Thomas lifted his gaze. It was a dark, profound stare, the eyes of a man who measured his life by scripture and self-denial. Yet, for the first time since her imprisonment, she saw not the blinding light of Puritan righteousness, but a flicker of exhaustion, a shadow of doubt hidden deep within the irises. "You do not fear the pit, woman," he challenged, stepping closer, his presence immediately dominating the confined space. The scent of tallow and expensive wool replaced the sour smell of the prison. "I fear injustice," Abigail whispered, leaning forward just enough to catch the light on her face. "And I fear the men who perpetuate it, claiming God's name for their own malice." Thomas drew a sharp breath. This was not the wailing, terrified confession he usually encountered in these final hours. This was defiance sculpted by sorrow. He forced himself to look away, scanning the papers, yet the image of her face, Pale, framed by loose auburn braids, the eyes, fiercely intelligent, remained burned onto his vision. He had promised himself this would be quick, clean. He needed to get home to his duty, to his sermons, and to the powerful man whose wife was already waiting at the edges of the scandal. He picked up a second deposition. It was the testimony given by Mrs. Lyra Caldwell, the wife of Magistrate Elias Caldwell, the woman who had first accused Abigail of looking at her with an evil eye. Lyra Caldwell claims that on the night of the full moon, she witnessed you brewing a poultice in the woods, speaking in tongues to a familiar, Thomas recited, his tone flat. She claims the poultice caused her child to sicken. Abigail gave a small, weary laugh, devoid of humor. Lyra Caldwell is a jealous viper who owes my family a significant sum of money. She is not a woman tormented by spectral assault, Judge Hawthorne. She is a liar tormented by avarice. Blasphemy! Thomas slammed the deposition down, the sound echoing sharply. You would defame the wife of a magistrate even on the eve of your execution? If defaming a liar saves my immortal soul from falsely confessing to black magic, then yes, I would defame her until Judgment Day, Abigail retorted, her chin lifting. But look closer, Thomas. Look at her handwriting. Look at the language used in her accusation against me, and against the baker's wife, and against old Goody Shaw. Thomas hesitated, unnerved by the way she had dared to use his Christian name. He glanced down at the sheaf of documents. He had read them dozens of times, seeking only confirmation of guilt. Now, under the fierce scrutiny of the woman he was about to execute, he began to see the familiar pattern. The same phrasing, the same highly stylized, almost poetic descriptions of devilish acts, repeated across 3 separate initial complaints. And all 3 initial complaints had been brought before the court by Lyra Caldwell, not as a victim, but as a witness against others. Thomas felt a sudden, sickening chill that had nothing to do with the freezing dungeon. The hand that held the papers began to tremble slightly. He knew Lyra Caldwell's penmanship. He had often admired the elegant, educated script of the magistrate's wife. And the meticulous, damning accusations against Abigail Liddell, the baker's wife, and Goody Shaw? They were all written in the exact same hand, Lyra Caldwell's hand. It wasn't Abigail who was doing the damning. It was Lyra Caldwell. In the sudden, terrible silence of the cell, Thomas stared at the evidence, the carefully constructed foundation of his entire career crumbling in his grip. The true witch was not the condemned, but the woman standing in the gilded cage of judgment. And she was protected by the most powerful magistrate in the colony. He looked up, meeting Abigail's gaze, and felt the iron of his own conviction melt away, replaced by the terrifying, exquisite realization that he was looking into the eyes of an innocent woman, a woman he was pledged to murder in the morning. "Why did you not show the port this discrepancy before?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I tried," Abigail said simply, her eyes softening with a pain that matched his own rising horror. "But in Salem, Thomas, the greatest act of witchcraft is the truth. He was trapped. If he exposed Lyra Caldwell, he would destroy Elias Caldwell, destabilize the court, and immediately put himself under suspicion. He would lose his position, his standing, his home, and likely gain a rope for his own neck. But if he remained silent, he would be guilty of murder." He looked at Abigail, and in that moment the sterile distance of the law collapsed entirely. He saw not the condemned witch, but the courageous heart he had failed to protect. And he found himself falling, plummeting into a forbidden, desperate love for the woman he had sworn to kill. The single sputtering candle cast long spectral shadows on the rough stone walls, making the cell feel like the antechamber to hell. Thomas gripped the folded evidence, proof of Abigail's innocence, proof of Lyra Caldwell's wickedness, so tightly the parchment wrinkled. His knuckles were white against the severity of his black robes. The silence was a monstrous weight, pressing the air from his lungs. He could hear the drumming of the guards' boots outside, a rhythm counting down the hours until the sun rose and the cart came for Abigail. He was a Puritan judge, a man who had built his life on order, on the infallible structure of the law. Now the law was a serpent coiled around his throat. "I have condemned innocent women," Thomas whispered, his voice ravaged, the realization of physical agony tearing through his chest.
"I sent them to the rope, believing I was doing God's work. I was blinded by the prestige of Salem, by the very system I upheld." He looked at Abigail, her face pale, but impossibly resolute in the flickering light. He had the proof, but the proof was a death warrant, not for her, but for him. Elias Caldwell would see to it. "If I take this evidence before the court," Thomas continued, the words scraping against his resolve, "I destroy the reputation of the highest magistrate in the colony. I invite suspicion upon myself. They will say I was the one bewitched. They will hang me beside you." He was trembling, paralyzed by the deepest, most primal fear a man of his standing could face: total annihilation. Abigail did not move. She watched him, her eyes wide, deep pools of midnight blue, holding a profound sorrow, but also a fierce, undeniable faith in the goodness she sensed beneath his Puritan shell. "And if you do not?" she challenged him, her voice startlingly clear, cutting through the thick atmosphere of dread. "If you let me die to preserve your life, your standing, your name, what then, Thomas? You will live, yes, but you will live with the blood of an innocent woman on your soul. You will be safe in your robes, but every sermon you hear, every prayer you offer will be a lie. You will have traded your courage for comfort, and that, sir, is a sin far greater than any Lyra Caldwell has committed." Her words struck him not as accusations, but as a divine judgment, fiercer than any fire and brimstone he had ever preached. She was holding a mirror to his soul, showing him the cowardice that masked itself as prudence. He took a desperate step toward her, the distance between them suddenly agonizing. "Do you not understand? They will destroy me, everything I am." "Everything you were, Thomas," Abigail interrupted, her voice softening, drawing him in with a tenderness that cracked his severe facade entirely. "You were a judge of Salem. Now look at your hands. They hold the truth. You must decide who you are now, the man who enforces a corrupt law or the man brave enough to challenge it." She reached out a hand, and for the first time, Thomas did not flinch from the touch of the accused. Her fingers, cold from the stone and the fear, brushed his wrist. The contact sent a jolt through him, searing away the last remnants of his puritanical reservation. "Do not be afraid of the scaffold, Thomas," she urged, her voice dropping to a fierce, desperate plea. "Be afraid of living without honor. Be afraid of the silence that kills the innocent. Be afraid of the empty, safe life you will lead, knowing I perished because you chose fear over justice. If you love me, Thomas, show me that you are worthy of redemption. Defy them." The word love hung heavy in the stale air, a forbidden covenant signed in the shadows of the condemned cell. It was the absolute truth that Thomas had been fighting, the terrible, magnificent realization that his condemnation of her had led him here, to the moment where he had to choose between his earthly life and his immortal soul. He saw the coming dawn through the barred window, the gray light a cold promise of execution. Time had run out. A sudden, savage clarity washed over him.
He was already damned. Damned by his role in the hangings, damned by the knowledge of the truth, and damned irrevocably by the burning, blasphemous love he felt for the woman he was supposed to sentence. If he was to fall, he would fall fighting. With a roar that was more pain than anger, Thomas dropped the damning evidence to the floor. It was no longer a piece of paper. It was a sword. He lunged forward, closing the space between them in a desperate final gesture. He seized her face, tilting it up toward his own, his cold, rigorous world shattering under the weight of his desperate need. "I defy them," he choked out, his voice thick with ruin and passion. "I defy Salem, I defy the court, and I defy the silence." He crushed his lips against hers, a kiss of complete surrender and high treason. It was frantic, starved, and absolute, the forbidden union of the judge and the witch sealing their fate under God and man. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing with a terrifying resolve. He was no longer the cautious judge. He was a revolutionary, a man consumed by justice and by love. He grasped the evidence, smoothing out the wrinkles with fierce precision. "They will have the truth, Abigail," he swore, his breath ragged. "I will bring it before the magistrates tonight, before the sun has a chance to rise. I will destroy Elias Caldwell, and I will tear their system down, even if I must stand on the scaffold beside you." He was already moving toward the door, his black robes whipping around him. "Stay here, Abigail. Pray, do not lose your courage now. I am coming back for you, and if they dare to touch you before I return, they will answer to the true God who watches over this unholy place." He did not wait for her reply. Thomas, the rigid, fearful judge, was gone, replaced by a desperate, heartbroken man armed only with the truth, plunging into the wicked heart of Salem's night to face his own execution. The silence of the cell roared behind him, promising both doom and deliverance. The epilogue. The smoke of Salem had long since dissipated from their clothes, but sometimes, when the wind blew just right across the western hills, Abigail swore she could still smell the bitter ash of the pyres and the fear that clung to that cursed place. 3 years had passed since the night Thomas plunged into the darkness, armed only with the truth. The ensuing chaos was total. He did not succeed in tearing the entire system down in a single night, but the evidence against Elias Caldwell was irrefutable. His corruption laid bare for all the stunned magistrates to witness. Thomas was stripped of his title, arrested, and nearly condemned. Yet his actions, the ultimate confession of institutional failure, shattered the court's credibility. Abigail was released, though forever marked by the word witch. They did not stay to watch the slow, painful rebirth of the town they hated. They fled west, away from the Atlantic and the severe God of the Puritans, settling instead in a small, wild valley where the trees offered sanctuary and the nearest settlement was too sparse to care about outdated superstitions. Now their cabin stood sturdy against the deepening twilight, a fire dancing cheerfully on the hearth. Abigail leaned into Thomas's chest, the heavy, dark cloth of his simple tunic a stark contrast to the stiff, formal robes he once wore. The man who held her now was scarred, yes, the memory of nearly losing everything etched deep beneath his eyes. But he was freer than he had ever been as a judge. He had traded power for peace, security for salvation. "Did you ever doubt me?" Thomas murmured, his lips brushing the crown of her hair, smelling faintly of the wood smoke he had been splitting all afternoon. Abigail traced the line of his jaw. "I doubted the truth. I doubted God. I doubted the strength of their walls. But I never doubted you, Thomas. Not once, after you chose to walk away from everything you knew for me." He tightened his arms, pulling her impossibly closer.
The firelight caught the simple silver band on her finger, a promise made not in the sight of the church or the law, but under the vast, lonely sky of their wilderness. "I only wish I had chosen sooner," he confessed, the echo of his past guilt softening in the safety of their home. "You chose precisely when you had to," she whispered, turning to press a slow, deep kiss upon his mouth. It was not a desperate, stolen kiss in a prison cell, nor a frantic sealing of a doomed pact. It was the kiss of two survivors, two exiles, who had rebuilt their world upon the ruins of the old one. It was quiet, consuming, and perfect. Outside, the darkness deepened, but within their walls, the light of their unwavering, fiercely fought love burned brighter than any torch ever lit in Salem. They were safe. They were together. They were finally, utterly free. Closing host monologue. What price do we pay for truth? What sacrifice does true love demand? For Thomas and Abigail, it required the destruction of their world, the abandonment of status, and the embrace of absolute ruin. Yet, in that ruin, they found a life more honest and a love more fierce than any they could have claimed in the confines of their fearful society. They chose the wild freedom of the heart over the suffocating safety of the law, and in the end, love was their vindication. Subscribe to Old Heart Stories. Until next time, cherish the courage that changes everything.